All right, now moving on to my third video in my Maps of Gettysburg series. This is looking at Terrible Swift Sword, along with a little bonus Rebel Sabers, with the what I consider to be fairly hilarious TSR era SPI covers. Like everything had sort of comic book quality. Everything that TSR did for all of the SPI titles they had, I swear, there must have been a requirement. There needs to be explosions. You can't do anything that doesn't have explosions. I think maybe Wellington's Victory is the one that doesn't have any actual explosions on it, because it's kind of like a replication of a famous painting of the era, but still, you know, like vivid colors. I believe blue and gray. Oh wait, does this have no? No, there's explosions. So whatever TSR SPI covers, and this is only like a 2-year period, I think, like maybe 1981 and 82 before TSR shit canned any more SPI titles. So that was always funny. I thought that these boxes always had these explosions on them. What we're looking at is Terrible Swift Sword, and then next to it we have the 3 Days of Gettysburg, which is the GMT re-implementation of the Great Battles of the American Civil War series, which is what Terrible Swift Sword started. I mean, it was obviously not a series when it was originally designed by Richard Berg, and this is the second edition, the TSR release, and it basically goes from what I would consider the ugliest Gettysburg map to the best looking, or at least my favorite Gettysburg map, which is the map for 3 Days of Gettysburg. How did we get from what I like to call, for this map, the lime jello and ham salad version of a Gettysburg map, to what I consider to be one of the handsomest Gettysburg maps that's not a Rick Barber Gettysburg map? I don't know. I don't know if it was GMT. So this map in particular is Mark Simonich and Joe Youst, and I'm not sure. The artwork on it looks more like a Simonich map to me, so I'm not sure what input graphically Joe Youst had for this particular map, and I actually don't know who designed the map. It is interesting though that Larry Elmore was the illustrator here, so he's a famous TSR artist who did a lot of classic Dungeons and Dragons artwork. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess if he's the illustrator, that's probably his work. So a little different than dragons and stuff. But I don't know who actually did the map for this, whether that was Ivor Johnsy and Colleen O'Malley listed as package and graphic design. Does that graphic design credit also include the map? I don't know. I'm just pointing out the manual here to see if that sheds any light. Yeah, Richard Berg had the original design, and then some extra guys worked on the second edition. Research, playtesting, graphic design. Yeah, Larry Elmore did the cover art. Tom Darden did cartography. So Ivor Johnsy and Tom Darden, most likely the people most involved with the map artwork on this. But the color choices are interesting. The greens, sure, you know, I understand the greens. You're showing woods, you know, as a particular color of green, whereas just clear terrain, but at a certain elevation is another level of green. Rough woods are then still a third level of green, but then why pink was chosen as the, at one of the levels of elevation, the higher elevation you get, the pinker the map gets. I don't know why pink was chosen as a color. It seems very bizarre to me to choose pink and green. The result is a just map that looks almost cacophonous in terms of its design. It looks like an infected sores, or the cemetery hill just looks like an infection in the middle of the map. It's very strange. That being said, I have played this game. I did some video on it, and I have played this and enjoyed it. As ugly as this map is, I have a certain fondness for it in the sort of almost the, like, it's so bad it's good feeling. It does have, with its gray borders, it does have that SPI feeling to it. The simplicity of the terrain iconography is good. It's certainly a readable map. The graphics on the map are fine. It is the colors that are really bizarre. They just feel completely divorced from reality. So, yeah. It is something to take in. You can see here now, ordinarily, this would just be 3 maps. It'd be kind of this arrangement. What I did is added the Rebel Sabers map, which is this far eastern map that includes the East Cavalry Field battle area that allows you to involve cavalry fights to the Gettysburg game. You can indeed link Rebel Sabers into Terrible Swift Sword and include it. It's not something that's very easily done. The manual itself says these games are kind of at different scales. There's sort of an easy link up for it and then the harder link up for it. And I haven't played either. It would be kind of cool to do so at some point, just to, it's one of those kind of challenges that's out there, and I feel almost compelled to try and make something of it. But I went ahead and put it out here. So this is not, what the typical Terrible Swift Sword map would look like. You would just whisk this away, and this is what the map would typically look like. It'd be just a simple, or, quote unquote, simple map, 3-mapper, but the Rebel Sabers adds this 4th map to it. So something that, one of those life goals, someday play it with 4 maps and the Rebel Sabers rules. For 3 days of Gettysburg, and something to point out, because I kind of was harsh on the gamers yesterday about this for Civil War Brigade series, about how their Thunder at the Crossroads map was very, the elevation was very tied to the hex grid, and both of these maps are exactly the same way. If you look at this, just looking at it broadly, the terrain has a very, jaggedy hexagonal quality to it, and that's because all of these, all the terrain, all the elevation colors are tied to the hex grid. And even more so than something like this Hallowed Ground was, or even Thunder at the Crossroads was, the woods even are tied pretty closely to the hex grid here. So, yeah, you've got more of a, very hexagonal looking, jagged edge looking map for this. And the same is the case with this map. Your elevation, very tied to the hex grid, a little more rounded. not quite as hard-edged as the Thunder at the Crossroads map is. But, you know, your trees and stuff are still very hex grid based. Your elevations still very hex grid based. But the illustration and the colors on this are probably my favorite out of any of the Gettysburg maps. That's not a Rick Barber map. And even, I have to say, I think I like this better than even the Rick Barber maps. The Rick Barber maps are beautiful to look at in terms of illustrative quality. This map is in my opinion, the best meeting of functionality with aesthetic design. It looks, you know, the buildings and things, if you look at a little more closely at the actual buildings of Gettysburg, they all have a little bit of a 3D quality to them. They are illustrated out. They cast shadows a little bit. They have roofs. So there's a nice illustrative quality to them. The font has a quaintness to it. The map, in my opinion, this evokes more of a 19th century feel to me, just in terms of, you know, fonts and the way the trees are illustrated, the way the buildings are illustrated. Something like a World War II map, for example, wouldn't look like this. But a you know, rifle, Age of Rifles era map does look, you know, that has this. It's that the illustrative qualities here work for that era for me. They evoke that era for me. So, you know, you've got your key down here that explains everything, but, you know, you look closely, all of the trees all have a nice illustrated quality to them. All the rivers, orchards, the rocks and stuff. It's all very just neatly, concisely illustrated. I like it. And the colors are good. They're not obtrusive, but it's not so, you don't have the 17 levels of elevation like you did with the Line of Battle series. The contrast between elevations are a little bit more stark here than they are with Last Chance for Victory, for example. The colors are more contrasty than they are with Last Chance for Victory, which is had a very subtle color palette. This has a slightly more contrasting color palette. A little bit green in there, but plenty of browns. You've got the classic Labatai style, almost white, sort of off-white cream color, clear terrain hexes that evokes a very Clash of Arms Labatai style. I'm thinking here about like Labatai de la Moscova or Ligny or Dresden. I like that. I also, again, those are all 19th century games that have very illustrative maps like this. So just something I really like here. And this, you know, labels all your key features on the classic features on the Gettysburg battlefield, with one notable exception. You can see here you've got Little Round Top illustrated, and here's, you know, like the bare face of Little Round Top leading down into the Valley of Death here, the Slaughter Pen, which is along here. Those are not labeled on here. You've noticed that they are labeled on other maps. Plum Run is labeled, Houck's Ridge there. Devil's Den, notably there. All the farms and stuff are labeled, which I love. The Rose Farm. Now, this doesn't label the Rose Woods, which is here. It doesn't label the wheat field, which is this open area. So that's a notable exception. You'll notice that even over here on the ham salad lime jello map, the wheat field is prominently called out. And note here that this has all these woods connected here, whereas most of the modern maps, again, have like that gap in the woods there leading into the wheat field. And even the modern battlefield today has where this kind of road, this path here is, there's a road there through the Rose Woods and the Stony Hill that is indeed open of forest and trees over to the Rose Farm. But this, you know, this labels the peach orchard. That's got the angle up here with Cemetery Hill. This doesn't label the cemetery itself, which you can see this map does. It's got the Evergreen Cemetery labeled right there on Cemetery Hill. But this does not label the angle, which is right here by the Bryan farmhouse. It would be, I'm thinking that hex, probably this hex right here is where the angle would be at. But you'll note it's not labeled there. But I was surprised that not to have the wheat field, not because it's, I mean, it's not, that's not like an Easter egg or tiny, you know, the angle maybe on this scale map might not be labeled because it's not a hex-sized feature, right? It's something that would be within a hex and a small portion of a hex. Whereas the wheat field is this, you know, these 4 hexes at least, and maybe out into these hexes. Actually, this would be the Wheatfield Road. So this is all the wheat field right here. And so I'm surprised that they wouldn't label it out, especially given that they did label the peach orchard here, which is really just this corner hex, actually this corner hex here on the other side of the Wheatfield Road. So interesting, you know, of what's labeled and what's not. You know, they even have like stuff like Lightner's Hollow over here, like what, you know, Powers, all the hills, Smithy's Knob, stuff that people don't even know about is labeled on here. Black Cat Knob, you know, stuff that anybody, you know, casual students of the Gettysburg Battle will be like, I don't know any of those things. But I do know the wheat field, and it's not labeled. So just very interesting that they chose not to do it on here. And, you know, I might say a missed opportunity. That doesn't change my affection for this map, though. Again, I love it as one of the clearest, most concise, and most image and era evocative maps. The counters as well for this series, and I think these are Mark Simonich designed counters as well. I also like those. You know, there's a lot of crusty grognard purists that hate images. They want, you know, I want NATO symbols, and you know, even for 19th century games, or given if there's no NATO symbols, they certainly don't want any sort of graphics on there. They want just symbology. And I'm in favor of seeing the graphics like this. I think these are handsome counters for a handsome map. So I'm fine with it, especially when you have an illustrative, particularly, you know, where the trees, you know, look like they're hand-drawn. The terrain features have a very hand-drawn quality to them. Then I think graphics of, you know, guys showing guys and horses and cannon on the counters, I think it's fine. I think it's good. I support it. The counters for this, you can see, are not, they just have little silhouettes on them, you know, which is fine for this type of map, which is not illustrative in any way. So yeah, you know, I think it just depends on the type of map you're doing too. If you're doing a map that is not particularly illustrative, then hey, you don't need the graphic images of infantry guys and horses and cannon. You can just use little symbols or silhouettes or whatever. But for this map, the counters are great, I think, and this is a very gorgeous looking game when you've got, you know, that Union line running from your little round top all the way up Cemetery Ridge into Cemetery Hill, and the Confederates marching in or sweeping up, as the case may be. Looks really gorgeous to see it all out there on the map. So my front runner for favorite Gettysburg map is GMT Games 3 Days of Gettysburg. My in the running for ugliest, but still fondly reminiscent of, perhaps because it's so ugly, is the TSR second edition of Terrible Swift Sword. I do not have the first edition of Terrible Swift Sword, the original soapbox SPI title. I really should, if I consider myself a true collector of Gettysburg games, I should really have the monster war game that started it all, the original Terrible Swift Sword soapbox. I do not have it. It is definitely not like this. It is more of a classic SPI style map, which means mostly white hexes for clear terrain, and then like kind of browns for different levels of elevation, and then I think probably green for trees. I've seen pictures of the SPI soapbox version, first edition of Terrible Swift Sword, and I don't remember how much green and brown is on it, but probably not a ton, just from that era of SPI maps. But anyway, I'll look at 2 classic Gettysburg monster game maps, and next up will be the Rick Barber maps.